start. Number one, notice of summary of the meeting. Please, can you take roll call?
Chair. Good afternoon, members. You're hereby summoned to attend the bi-monthly meeting of the Assurance, Audit and Risk Committee, which will be a hybrid, socially distanced meeting to be conducted remotely via WebEx and also physically in the Council Chamber, Guildhall, Derry, today, Monday, the 20th of September at 4 p.m. I'll take the roll. Alderman Keith Kerrigan.
Here, Denise.
Alderman David Ramsey. Councillor Raymond Barr.
Here, Denise.
Councillor Michaela Boyle. Councillor Sean Carr.
Here, Denise.
Councillor Emmett Doyle.
Here, Denise.
Councillor Paul Fleming. Councillor Paul Gallagher.
Sure.
Councillor Patricia Logue. Councillor Emma McGinley. Councillor Philip McKinney.
Here, Denise.
Councillor Maeve O'Neill.
Here.
Councillor Martin Riley.
Here, Denise.
Councillor Lillian Sino Barr.
Yeah, Denise.
Thank you, members. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Denise. Item 3 is the broadcasting statement, which I'll read. I would like to remind everyone present at this meeting in the Guildhall or in attendance remotely that this meeting will be broadcast live to the internet and will be capable of repeated viewing. This broadcast may be terminated or suspended in accordance with our protocol. Due to your attendance at this meeting, you are consenting to being filmed and to use and storage of those images for broadcasting or training purposes and for the purpose of keeping historical records and making those records available to the public. Members and approved speakers are reminded to only have their mics and cameras on while speaking at the meeting and to use the chat facility to highlight a request to speak. A copy of the Council privacy notice may be found on the Council website, www.derrystavan.com. Thank you. And we'll move on to item 4, declaration of members' interest.
Just member of the Triax.
Thank you, Patricia.
Right, Chair, just member of, trying to think now, actually. Sorry.
Chair, member of Rapid and Community Partnership, Vaughan Community Partnership.
May I declare an interest in relation to the COVID support item related to party disclosure in relation to the first tranche of Community Support Fund.
Okay, thank you. And move on. There's no chairperson's business.
Chair, I also like a member of the Triax board and Dove House and the Carnival Initiative boards. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Maeve. Item 6 is matters arising from the open minutes held on the 20th of June. Any matters arising? Second. Thank you. On to item 7. COVID support. Denise, taking us.
Thanks, Chair. The purpose of this report, members, is to seek your endorsement for the draft terms of reference to procure external support to carry out an independent audit on the range of projects and interventions put in place to assist communities over the COVID-19 pandemic. Members will recall the motion that was passed at the full council meeting on the 27th of May and the subsequent recommendations that were agreed at the Assurance, Audit and Risk Committee in June. Following this meeting and ratification at full council meeting, the internal audit team, in conjunction with officers in community services and strategic finance, have completed a mapping exercise to identify the range of projects and interventions put in place to assist the communities over the COVID-19 pandemic. The mapping exercise includes all COVID-19 interventions that were put in place, and members will see from the report that a total amount of approximately 1.7 million was distributed by council in 10 different categories. Based on the information outlined in the report, the audit team have drafted a terms of reference for the independent audit, which is attached at the appendix there for members' information. It requests the appointed company to undertake an evaluation exercise to determine the effectiveness, governance and impact of all these interventions, whether primary or secondary, liaise with members to ensure that all issues of concern are covered in the scope of this review, and to undertake a root and branch investigation and review into the above. Key deliverables from the review shall consist of the presentation of 3 reports: an evaluation report, an investigation report, a systems report, and ultimately then the presentation of these reports to the next available meeting of the Audit Committee. There are no equality, rural or climate change data protection issues arising from the work. In terms of financial, it's challenging to estimate the cost of the piece of work at this time, as we cannot accurately specify how long it will take to complete the task required. But given the requirements, the time required to complete is likely to be significant. It's estimated that the external support requirement will cost approximately between £800 to £1,000 a day. Council does not have a budget set aside to cover this external audit support cost, so it would be managed as a financial pressure and risk, and this can only be taken forward if financial underspends are identified from other service areas throughout the year. So in terms of the recommendations today, members, we're looking for you to endorse the proposed approach to deal with the notice of motion, which was approved at the full council meeting. It is recommended that members review, agree and approve the terms of reference. Officers commence a procurement exercise and present the results of this exercise to members for approval prior to the appointment of the company. And if members agree to the proposed approach, council officers will communicate to the affected community organisations. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Any member looking to speak?
Thank you, Denise, for that report. On behalf of our party, I just want to express our concern that the amount of money it is estimated that it's going to take to carry out this. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. No indicated speakers? Emmett, go ahead.
I'd just like to propose the item.
We've got a second there for recommendations.
I'll second, Chair, Councillor Barr.
Thanks.
Go ahead, Denise.
Thanks, Chair. Again, members, the purpose of this report is to seek your endorsement for the draft terms of reference to procure external support to carry out an independent audit of governance and recruitment procedures in all community groups that are in receipt of council funding over the past 5 years. So like the previous report, members will recall the motion which was approved at the full council meeting in May and the subsequent recommendations agreed at the Audit Committee. Following this, the audit team have carried out a mapping exercise of all community groups that have been in receipt of council funding over the past 5 years. Members will see from the report that the total funding paid out to community groups was 11.3 million, and a total of 394 groups are included within that. Members will be aware at the last meeting of the Audit Committee in June, a discussion did take place about restricting the scope of the audit to only include organisations that received over £20,000 of council funding. This discussion didn't form part of any final recommendations, and therefore at this stage officers have assumed that the recommendation made as part of the original motion still stands. That is, all community groups that are in receipt of council funding over the past 5 years. However, given the fact that a discussion did take place regarding the level of funding to be reviewed, officers have developed the table below for members' information. The table highlights the differences in the number of groups to be reviewed in 3 different scenarios. The first one being all community groups that are in receipt of council funding over the past 5 years. Members will see there that that totals 394 groups and a total of 11.3 million of funding. The second option, community groups that have been in receipt of over 20,000 of council funding cumulatively over the past 5 years. which would total 105 groups and 9.5 million of funding. And the third option, community groups that have been receipt of over 20,000 in any individual year over the past 5 years, which would total 56 groups and 7.5 million of funding. Members are advised that as per the original motion, Council did write to the Department for Communities suggesting it carry out a similar audit of organisations it funds. The Chief Executive received a response to this request on the 3rd of July. And in summary, the Department advised that due to the controls that are currently in place as a result of the Department's grant standards, assurances provided by the community and voluntary sector, the work undertaken by the Charities Commission and the work undertaken by the Department's internal audit team, they are not planning to undertake an audit of governance and recruitment procedures at this time. However, they would be grateful if Council could advise them if the independent audit carried out by Council identifies specific evidence that would give rise to concern in terms of regularity. At the previous meeting of the Assurance, Audit and Risk Committee, members queried as to how an audit of governance and recruitment would be completed. Detailed below is the objectives and controls that would normally be reviewed as part of a governance audit and recruitment, and which will likely form the basis of this audit. So based on all the information outlined above, the audit team have drafted a terms of reference for the audit. And again, the purpose of it is to establish whether governance, policies and practice in the community sector are transparent, accountable, ethical and able to manage the conflicts of interest which inevitably arise in organisations often overseen by volunteer management committees. Therefore, where the information is forthcoming, the requirement is to identify, document and evaluate the arrangements in place to manage the risks associated with poor governance and recruitment procedures in all community groups that are in receipt of Council funding over the past 5 years. The scope of the audits of governance and recruitment in all community groups should specifically include pay rates, terms and conditions of the workers in those organisations, including differentials in pay and terms and conditions for different grades within the organisation. Key deliverables arising from the review shall consist of a final report for each community group reviewed, a final report then detailing a collated summary of the conclusions and a presentation of the reports then to the Audit Committee. Again, in terms of the implications, members, it is extremely challenging to estimate the cost of the piece of work, and it's estimated again that it will cost approximately between £800 to £1,000 a day. Given the extent of organisations funded by Council, this work is likely to take a significant number of months to complete, so the associated costs are likely to be very significant. Council does not have a budget set aside to cover external audit support costs, so this would have to be managed as a financial pressure and risk. It can only be taken forward if financial underspends are identified from other service areas. So in terms of recommendations today, members, it's to seek your endorsement for the proposed approach to deal with the notice of motion. But what we're asking today, members, is a decision is taken in relation to the scope of the independent audit and for you to decide which of the following options should form the basis of the audit. Option 1, all community groups that are in receipt of Council funding over the past 5 years. Option 2, community groups that have been in receipt of over 20,000 of Council funding cumulatively over the 5 years, which would be 105 groups. Or option 3, community groups that have been in receipt of over 20,000 in any individual years, which would be a total of 56 groups. Following that, members review, agree and approve the terms of reference, and then officers commence a procurement exercise and present the results of this exercise to members for approval prior to appointment. If members agree to the proposed approach, the Council officers will communicate the approach to the affected community organisations. Thanks, members.
Thank you, Denise. Before I bring anyone on, I'm going to read this. I think it's very rich as a Department for Communities to turn around and say, you're paying for an audit, and anything you find, I would be grateful for that information, but it's going to cost us money to try and find that. And having a look at it, you know, and having a look through the motion as well, there's one as if this audit is very open, i.e. to almost 400 groups, I think it can become very protracted and very costly. And I think that a sensible approach, I think that if we're looking for a proper audit, I think that we can find it through the option of looking at the 56 groups, and it should also help keep costs down. That would be my preference, I think, before I put it out the floor. I don't think that whatever way a complete audit of doing 56 groups should find whatever needs to be found, whether it's for or against. So I think that's what we should be going for. The danger is if it becomes too long, it could run out of money. We could run out of money to pay for it and mightn't get it reach any conclusion. So that's what I'll bring in Councillor Mabel.
Thanks, Chair, and I'm happy to propose that option 3 for the funding for over £20,000 in any individual year over the past 5 years, because the focus on the motion was around recruitment and workers, and just the motion had said about pay rates and terms and conditions. So I'm just wondering, like, is that also going to be included in the audit, because it didn't really come under the, or from what I saw, the governance and the recruitment kind of subheadings, those other differentials, and just the motion, there was a kind of a last bit in the motion around council requests that all community funded organisations facilitate a meeting of workers with trade union reps with a view to, if workers wish, a recognition agreement. And I'd kind of said at the last meeting that was missing from the motion, but it hasn't been amended from the motion in that paper as well. It's not on, it's also not on the council services page, but it is within the minutes because that was an amendment to the motion the night it was proposed. So that's just an amendment as well. But I'm happy to propose option 3 because, as you say, it's it is the focus of the motion in terms of like employing workers, and it's the cheapest as well. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor McKinney.
Thank you for letting me in, Chair. I would second that, what Maeve's proposing there. I have no objections to the 56 at over 20 grand. Yes, definitely. We need to sort of be transparent with this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Logue.
Thank you, Chair. And before I say what I want to say regarding the item, it's just to comment on your opening remarks. Whether the Department of Communities were going to carry out an audit or not, it still doesn't negate the fact that this paper is saying that we should carry out a motion. So this wasn't going to save us, this council, any money, whether the Department of Communities were going to carry out an audit or not, an audit which they have already done. But anyhow, first of all, John, see the whole employment issue. Given the response from the Department of Communities, even though they fund the posts, they have underlined they are not the employer, and certainly we as a council are not the employer. What is the legality of us trying to go into an organisation to look at their systems and practices of employees that we have no remit over at all? So I suppose it would be the legality of the whole thing. The second thing would be, I need clarity on whether the motion actually says all community groups. So I need legal clarity on whether any of the other two options would be legal to change the motion at this stage, or should it mean that it would take another motion? And I suppose the third thing, John, is just a wee bit of clarity regarding and I understand you mightn't be able to do it, but it's the actual response from the Department of Communities, the letter, and it's the third paragraph, and maybe I'm reading it wrong, but I'll just read it out and tell you the way I'm interpreting it. It's saying you have highlighted a number of governance and recruitment concerns the council has identified with community groups it funds. So it's actually saying in their response that council have identified concerns. So is that them misinterpreting the letter that was written to them? Or am I misinterpreting their response?
I think that's the last question. I think it's a difficult question for the Chief Executive to answer because that's theirs and
Well, it's
doesn't
actually,
know their thought process.
Chair, if you will just allow me, it's saying in response to council, you have highlighted a number of governance and recruitment concerns the council has identified with community groups at funds. So for me, that's saying that the council have already identified concerns.
So maybe it's how you phrase your question.
Well, I suppose, Chair, what I'm asking is, have they responded wrong to the actual letter that was sent to them? So, definitely, if that was a mistake on their part, and that's the way that this has been, you know, interpreted by everyone else, then I think it needs to be corrected, because it's, if it's coming across the way I feel it's coming across, then it's actually in black and white that the council have actually highlighted identified concerns without the audit being actually done.
So thank you, Chair, for bringing me in, and thank you, Councillor, for the questions. Challenging to answer, a number of them. Maybe starting in reverse order with the third one. Obviously, language can be interpreted differently depending on how it's phrased, but certainly from a council perspective, we would have simply written to the Department for Communities, quoting the council resolution. We wouldn't have made any further comment or elaboration around that. We would have simply written to the Minister and to the Department, simply quoting the exact wording of the council resolution. I stand to be corrected by Denise if that's the case. She's nodding, so that's the case. With regard to the middle point you raised, legal advice on any change to the motion at this stage, I would be of a view, without having consulted with our legal team, that should that be the decision of council, that would be that would suffice. But again, I'll just check with Denise if specific advice has been sought on that from the legal team. No, so we'd be happy to do so following this meeting today, if that's a request of members. And any decision that you take could be subject to that outcome. And with regard to the issues raised under the scope of recruitment, I think the report sets out the limitations on the scope that can be taken forward with regard to recruitment issues, both in the body of the report and the terms of reference. And again, there would be limitations there in terms of what we can take forward as a council. But again, I'd maybe through you, Chair, ask Denise to go into that in a little more detail, if you would, please, Denise.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks, John. Thanks, Chair. In terms of the scope, members will be aware that in the report we have outlined what is included within a governance audit and what is included within a recruitment audit. And in response to Councillor O'Neill's comments in terms of the pay rates, then yes, that would be included. But in terms of Councillor Lowe's comments, what is the legality of us going into an organisation? We're still looking at that at the minute, Councillor Lowe. But we as a council, we can obviously ask for anything in relation to the money that we provide the organisation. Any of our funding, that's obviously included within our letter of offer. If there's other funding, we're obviously restricted in terms of what we can look at there. So that'll all have to form part of the audit as well in terms of what can be looked at. And I think that's what the Chief Executive refers to whenever he says that there will be limitations to the audit.
Thank you, Denise. And John, if I could just, Chair, if I could just come back on again, just to respond. I suppose, I think then it would be prudent maybe defer this item to full council until that legal advice is clarified. Also, just to finish off my my comments, I do think that this smacks of political vetting, which the British government brought in the 1980s with two community groups. And it certainly hindered a lot of people gaining employment, where a lot of employers were sort of scared off if they felt or knew a person was of a political persuasion. So I certainly think that this is political vetting in its utmost form, and I'm proposing that it be brought into full council until we get the legal. We certainly wouldn't be in a position to take a vote if we haven't got the full legality of the whole situation. And maybe, John, just on the letter, on that third paragraph, given that it is black and white and it is maybe misinterpreting what was actually sent in, that we sent a letter from this committee stating that, you know, indeed, nothing has been identified. Thank you.
Councillor Doyle.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Denise, for the report. I was struck primarily by the response from the department, and I think to echo your point earlier on, Chair. You know, I know the department are very busy paying capita at the minute and taking 20 quid a week off people who are getting it tight, but I'm glad that they have written back to us. I think and have thought for many years, and it would be my party's position, that what they've put in the letter is exactly the problem. The fact that a chairperson of an organisation that can be snapped up and created in a matter of weeks at times can sign off on a recruitment process and say, we did everything right, is a dereliction of duty from the department. And that goes right back over many years, depending on, it doesn't matter really which political party held the department at that time, because we have seen it time and time again. And in fairness to Councillor Logue, I have to comment on, you know, this idea of political vetting. The idea that, you know, I read a piece, I think it was in the Irish News about 2 weeks ago from Dennis Bradley. And I don't have the piece here, but the gist of it was that actually it was, and these are his words, that actually it was Sinn Féin that was involved in managing and running community groups, and that was something that was beyond the pale, or words to those effect, and I totally agree with him, because I think that's what is at the heart of where this came from, because, you know, if we're talking about political vetting, one doesn't need to look very far to see that there are community groups up and down this district who have engaged in practices whereby I would see it as political vetting, whereas if you're not in a certain political party, you don't get a look on. And I think that that's well reflected. And I say, to go back to what Dennis said, I think if he's able to write it in the Irish News, Irish Times, whatever it was, then it's not just me that thinks that. I'm wondering, Chair, if you might be able to guide me. I would say primarily that I'm quite prepared to go to a vote on the previous speaker's proposals, but I'm asking if it's possible for us to, in the recommendations, place a 5.1.5 and write back to the department. Now, the wording, of course, the gist of it will be that the very problem is that organisations are self-regulating. They're able to appoint a chair, they're able to use public money to employ staff, and then when the department, from a sedentary position miles away in Belfast, say, have you done everything right? They all put their hands up and say, yes, we did. Well, of course, that's what they're going to say. It is their responsibility as a government department who have audit responsibility over their own funding to be able to guarantee that everything is done by the letter of the law and by the book. And I'd like to see if we can write a letter back to the department to that effect, because I don't think that it's acceptable for any government department to step back and say primarily what you had said. A, thanks very much for doing an audit. We don't think there's a need for one, but if you want to do one, work away as long as you're paying for it. But two, that the very nature of the problem is because of their own processes. So be glad, Chair, if you could give me some guidance on adding that in. But quite happy to contest what the previous speaker said and go to a vote if that's what needs to be done.
Councillor, I think we're probably better bringing that back to full council. I'll bring in, bring in Councillor Martin Riley.
Yeah, Chair, thanks. I suppose just in relation to, a previous councillor mentioned deferring this to full council, my view would be that all the decisions at all of the committees all go to full council anyway. So I don't see the need for no decision to be taken here today. And I think that the legal advice was provided in relation to the motion when it was on the floor at that stage. Chair, just in relation to the letter itself from the Department of Communities, I think that seems to be where the main conversations this afternoon is taking place. Happy with what had been said by other councillors at the start of the debate on this item to go with option 3, the 56 groups or so. I think that's probably the best approach at this stage. But just in relation to the correspondence from the Department of Communities, on page 50 of the pack in the second paragraph, on the in the letter, it also mentions about the minister having a decision to be taken in the near future about a review. The letter from the Department of Communities is dated the 2nd of July. So I'm just wondering, is there any update to that letter in relation to that part of the correspondence? Because certainly in the near future, if the letter was written on the 2nd of July, surely that may have been already taken. And if so, is there any update that we can get from the Department of Communities on that particular point in the second paragraph of the correspondence? But Chair, just happy with what had been initially proposed. I think it was by Councillor O'Neill in relation to going with the third option under 5.1. Thank you.
Any comment? Any update? No.
Through you, Chair, I'm not aware of any update having been received with regard to that, but obviously if it's the will of council, we will further write to the department with regard to that in due course.
We have a proposal on the floor, which has been seconded. So we'll go with that first, which is, you want to okay. We have a proposer on the floor, seconded, and we'll call a vote. Do you want to take a vote call, Denise?
Okay, members, so this is a vote for option 3, that the audit includes 56 community groups. So Alderman Keith Kerrigan.
Denise, I'm going to abstain on this one. Thank you.
Alderman David Ramsey. Councillor Raymond Barr.
For.
Councillor Michaela Boyle, still not on.
Yes, I'm here, Denise.
You are,
Against.
Michaela. Sorry, you're against. Thanks. Councillor Sean Carr.
For, Denise.
Councillor Emmett Doyle.
For Denise.
Councillor Paul Fleming.
Against, Denise.
Councillor Paul Gallagher.
For.
Councillor Patricia Logue. Just checking. Councillor Emma McGinley. Still not on. Councillor Philip McKinney.
For, Denise.
Councillor Maeve O'Neill.
For.
Councillor Martin Riley.
For Denise.
Councillor Lillian Sino Barr.
For Denise.
Thank you, members.
Chair, just before the vote is tallied, could I just check the list of councillors that have been called to vote. I think the SDLP has 3 members in this committee. I think, if I'm not mistaken, only 2 names were called out from our party. Could Denise or John check that, please?
Chair, I believe Councillor Edwards is a third SDLP member. Maybe I'm wrong with that. I don't think he's present, but maybe I'm wrong.
I'm present here, Chair.
Apologies.
Apologies if that's the case. It's just not highlighted in the list here I have in front of me, but I can record that as Councillor Edwards being on and for. Thank you. So members, the total is 9 for, 3 against and 1 abstained. Thanks.
Patricia,
Thank you, Chair. And just to finish off, and again, I have to just say deeply, deeply concerned that a councillor has once again used his position in this chamber to, what I would say, advise on libelous remarks regarding Sinn Féin and community groups and running community groups. But I'm glad that there will be a recording of this so that the relevant people can look at it. And again, he has made accusations of chairpersons of community groups being snapped up in a matter of weeks to make very, very serious decisions. Again, if that councillor has that evidence and the evidence of Sinn Féin running community groups, take it to the relevant authorities. And maybe this audit will be done very quickly.
thank you, Patricia. No, well, we're going to move on. All right. I think you were quoting newspapers, but that's another story. Okay, we'll take item 9, and I think somebody's going to take it. Alfie's going to take this one. Over to you, Alfie, if you're on.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. Members, the report is to seek your approval of the Council financial statements, which includes our governance statement for the financial year 2021. You will recall that these were submitted to Department for Communities back in June, following approval of our year-end outturn report by the Governance and Strategic Planning Committee back in June also. These have now been subject to audit by Northern Ireland Audit Office, with the final audited accounts before you today and being published by the end of this month. And I will shortly hand over to Colette to take you through their findings of that audit. Obviously, members, the accounts are a very detailed document, well in excess of 100 pages. I would just draw your attention to 2 key points from my perspective. So firstly, we have the deadline for both submission and audit of our accounts has been achieved, in spite of the challenges for both the officers and audit staff around working from home, etc. So that's a positive outcome. And secondly, members, the reported position that was brought into Governance and Strategic Planning Committee has not changed. So that's positive. The 2 key aspects of that, members, going back to the outturn report, was firstly that our district fund balance remains unchanged at 5.18 million, and that sits within the recommended guidelines of between 5 and 7.5% of our net expenditure, which is set out in DFC guidance. Secondly, members, and probably most importantly, following governance meeting last week, is that the financial resilience and capital resourcing reserves that we have set aside as a result of our contingency plans and government funding received in advance, which are detailed in page 7 of the attached accounts document, those remain as reported in June. So as advised to GSP last week, these provide Council with financial assurance to cover all the substantial financial risks that we face. and that will provide that assurance up until 31st of March 22. And we will obviously be now embarking on the rates process for the 21 or for the year beyond that. So members, on that note, I will hand over to Colette to talk you through the NIAO findings. Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Let's go ahead, Claire.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chair. So, members, I'm going to take you through the draft report to those charged with governance. And I'm pleased to present this, and I'll highlight the key parts of it. Most importantly, I'm pleased to report that based on the audit completed, we are proposing an unqualified audit opinion. As in previous years, the audit opinion will include an emphasis of matter paragraph referring to the City of Derry Airport. This paragraph refers to disclosures made within council accounts detailing the funding of CODA and also the significant assets within council's accounts. We note the funding secured for CODA to March 2023, but believe it's important to draw the users of the accounts to this issue. I can further report that we have carried out our audit requirements concerning the proper arrangements, and I can confirm we are satisfied Council has in place proper arrangements for securing economy, efficiency and effectiveness in its use of resources. As indicated on page 2 of the report, the audit is still ongoing, but I can advise we are on track to complete the audit and certify the financial statements by the end of September. As Alfie has said, this is a significant achievement for Council and for Audit, as it brings us back into normal deadlines following a very difficult year. And both Council and ourselves are to be commended for doing this. I would say, members, that we're the only part of the UK that are actually doing this. All our other colleagues in the rest of the UK are not able to bring their deadlines back into normal time frame yet. So the committee are asked today to carry out a couple of actions which are detailed in the document, and that is to review the findings within this report, including the draft letter of representation and audit certificate, which I'll bring to your attention, and then also to consider the uncorrected misstatements, which I'll also bring to your attention. So on page 5 of the document, we identified 2 significant risks at the outset of the audit. The first of these is a significant risk which is common to all audits, which is the presumed risk of material misstatement due to fraud through the management override of controls. We carried out a suite of tests and we have not identified any issues in respect of this. The second significant risk we identified refers to the going concern status of City of Derry Airport, which I previously referred to, and which we have now concluded that an emphasis of matter paragraph is necessary within the audit opinion. Pages 6 to 8 note a number of issues where we also give assurance. These include, for example, the standard of financial accounts and working papers that were produced, accounting policies, estimates and disclosures, matters such as going concern, disclosures in the narrative and remuneration reports and governance statement and other matters. I can confirm positive assurance on all these matters. I would bring members' attention to some commentary at the bottom of page 7 and the top of page 8, where we've highlighted the funding provided by the Department for Communities for use in the future. This has been included in a usable reserve to be used for future years. We've also noted the significant increase in usable reserves at the year and which is an increase of 10.5 million from the previous year. It's important that Council ensures that there's clear plans to utilise these reserves in the future. I would say that increase in reserves has been apparent across all councils this year. So the findings from our audit are outlined on pages 8 to 10, and there are 3 priority 2 and 1 priority 3 finding. I would note that as the audit is ongoing, there may be additional findings, but they're not expected to impact the audit opinion. So finding 1 is in respect of payroll, and our report notes a number of control weaknesses in the administration of payroll. Our recommendation asks that staff are reminded of the need to adhere to controls, and you'll see there that management have accepted our recommendation. The second finding is in respect of expenditure. And again, this is about weaknesses in internal controls, particularly around delays in raising purchase orders. Again, we recommend staff are reminded of the purchasing requirements, and again, management have accepted our recommendation. The third finding is around journals. And we note that out of an example of 20 journals, 3 of them had not been signed as approved. Once again, management have accepted our recommendation to ensure that that happens in the future. Our final finding, the priority point, 3 point, is around leases. And we noted that in 3 cases that we looked at, leases are being paid by council, but they don't have a signed lease in place. And again, management note that this will be resolved as a matter of priority. Page 11 of our report identifies the adjusted misstatements, and page 12 identifies the uncorrected misstatements, which have a net effect of 175,000 on the financial statements. The committee should consider whether these need to be adjusted at this time. The letter of representation is in the usual format as on pages 13 to 16, and this will be signed by the Chief Executive at the same time as the accounts. No unusual representations have been sought. Pages 17 to 21 are the draft audit certificate, and I'll bring members' attention to page 17, which details the emphasis of matter paragraph that I previously discussed. And finally, pages 22 and 23 include the previous year's priority 2 recommendations with an update on any progress made. Thank you.
Councillor Fleming.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a declaration of interest in terms of member of the airport board, non-pecuniary interest. Just a.
Thank you. Any members' comments? Councillor Logue.
Chair, thank you. And just to record I sit as an observer too in Duff House, if that could be recorded too, please. No, just to thank everybody for the work that's been done in this report here. It's certainly good to know that, you know, we are ahead of the game when it comes to getting the work done that needs done. But there have been a few recommendations that I'm sure the actions that have been provided by management, that those recommendations will be cleared up, and hopefully we'll get a full clean bill next time around. Thank you again.
Thank you, Chair, and I should have mentioned as well earlier when I forgot, declared interest at on Ballyornet Communities Neighbourhood Renewal, as well as Carnhill Resource Centre. Just in relation, Chair, I'm far from an expert, so I'm wondering if someone could maybe explain to me what an uncorrected misstatement is and what it means. Just on page 12 there, uncorrected misstatements would increase expenditure and decrease net assets by 175k, because I suppose a layman looking at this, that to me sounds like we're down 175k somewhere. Can someone maybe give us a bit more information about that? Thank you.
Okay, Alfie's still on this. Alfie, do you want to come back in?
Yep, Chair, yep, that's what it means. I suppose we just have to focus on the nature of the unadjusted misstatement. When we prepare the accounts, we do that in May and June each year, based on the information to hand, and the specific issue relates to a claims provision that we had made against one of the specific claims against council. Since the accounts were submitted, new information has emerged in relation to that claim, which the Audit Office are entitled to highlight that, obviously, through the passage of time. So that would basically represent an unadjusted misstatement, but one which we wouldn't have foreseen at the time of preparing the accounts. So basically the proposal is that we adjust for that misstatement, and we would simply just recalculate our claims provision at the end of 31st of March 22 again, and hopefully during the year we would have, you know, enough slack within that provision to offset basically the impact of that catch up. So that's the position, members. Certainly, I would propose that, or I would request that I don't see it as a material adjustment to amend, and we would swallow that up this year in light of the assessment of all our other claims.
Okay, thank you for that. You want to come back?
Thank you, Chair. Alfie, I'm sure you're doing your very best to explain what exactly this is, but I still don't get some of the language. I have to be dead honest. And when I said, "Is this 175k we're down?" and it sounds like we are. Can you explain in maybe a bit more detail what this? Well, I mean, I'm just a bit confused about it. As I say, when I mentioned 175k down, and we kind of largely agreed with that, you referred to a claim, for example. Can you maybe tell us what that is? Because if we're down 175k now, is that something that we're going to be able to get back from this claim you're talking about at the start of the next financial year? Thank you.
Yep, so members, one of the key provisions that we have to make at the end of the year, we obviously have a range of claims that are made against council each year for a range of issues, and a number of them very complex. Our legal team obviously works through those claims. In our year-end accounts, we need to make an assessment of the probability of those claims being settled and put a value against those. So the accrual that we have in our accounts represents a multitude of claims. One of the claims, with the additional information that was provided, turned out that the estimate would now be higher, basically in September, as opposed to June. It does impact our bottom line, members. It would mean our district fund would be 175k lower. But I have highlighted previously that our district fund is still well within the recommended guidance. So, obviously auditors work to materiality, and they're not proposing that that's a material sum in the context of our wider financial statements. And on that basis, we will reflect this now in our quarter 2 financial outturn report this year, now that we know about it. I would hope that the amount of money that we set aside for insurance and claims in this financial year will be enough to cover any movement and provision, etc. this year. In terms of the individual claims, I don't have the information at hand to go into any individual claims. We can obviously provide that, but I would assume those would be confidential in nature. So, yep, the answer to your question, it does have an impact on our bottom line, but I'm proposing that we would adjust that in the current financial year within the budget that we have available to cover claims and insurance.
Brian, the Chief Executive.
Thank you, Chair. Maybe in slightly more layman's language, as Alfie said, it does have an impact on our bottom line, but it will have an impact on our bottom line anyway. It's simply a case that it doesn't hit our bottom line in the last financial year. It will now hit our bottom line this financial year. I think that's correct to say, Alfie, and that's the manner in which it'll be handled.
Thank you. Councillor Martin Riley, look at.
Yeah, Chair, just to thank Alfie and Colette for talking us through the presentation, and then John for the additional points of clarification there at the end. I think it is good to hear you say, Colette, that we are leading by example in terms of getting back into the normal rhythm of reporting. So that's positive to see. I'm happy to give this a proposal, Chair, if it needs it, or if I'm not sure if Councillor Logue did that. So happy to second it if she already has proposed it. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Before I draw the close, anyone else looking to comment?
Chair, if I could have an opportunity to ask some questions.
Who's that?
It's Brona.
Go ahead, Brona.
I did have my hand up on the screen, but maybe it's not visible from where you are, Chair. Thank you very much. I would just like to echo what's been said about the great achievement that's been done by Alfie and his team, and indeed Colette and her audit team, and also getting an unqualified opinion within the deadline in these circumstances is extremely good. So well done to everybody. It's good to hear that the council is in a good financial stable position at the moment. I know moving forward with the issues around business rates and the uncertainty in raising those, and the revaluation appeals that no doubt will come through, and the bad debts write-off that will happen in the future. There will be further impacts on the financial situation, and no doubt Alfie will be keeping us informed of that. In relation to a few questions, if I may, Chair, I'm happy to ask the 4 questions in one go, or if Alfie would prefer, I could take one at a time. I don't think they're that complicated. Chair, if you would like to, would you like me to take them one at a time?
Just, can you do them all in one go again?
I can certainly, Chair. The first one is in relation to the financial commitments and contingency reserves, and it's great to see so much money has been put into the reserves for future consideration, and Colette did refer to that and the timing of that spend, and I was just wondering if Alfie had any idea as to when that large figure will be utilised. Question number 2 is in relation to the contingent liability and the PSNI holiday pay case, and what are the likely implications for the council going forward once that has been resolved. Question number 3 is in relation to the accumulated absence account. It's up from 411,000 to 1 million, and if Alfie could just give us a bit more information about that, that'll be welcomed. And lastly, in relation to the rate support grant, I see the budget, the differential between the budget and the actual was 657,000, and if Alfie could give us a rationale for that, perhaps the estimate was lower than what was actually received in the first instance, and also recognising that there's I believe a 25% cut going forward, and what the implications for the council would be in relation to that. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Do you want to come back on that, Alfie?
Yeah.
Chair, thank you. The financial resilience reserve, hard to say when it will be exactly utilised, but I know we've already utilised a significant sum in Q1 to cover our leisure income losses and our exceptional expenditure. An element of that reserve, Brona, relates to future rates provision. We're currently in a situation where there's been very little bad debt written off by land and property services in relation to the rates income that we receive. So that's probably a provision that we're going to have to hold until after the current government relief schemes are in place and we can get a full assessment of the pandemic. The second question in relation to the holiday pay case, it's disclosed as a contingency because we don't know the impact of that. We've highlighted it as a risk, but certainly the hope from a financial perspective is that it doesn't have any financial impact, but it's too early to say. Otherwise, we would have made an exact provision on the accounts, which we weren't able to do. Third question, the accumulated absences accrual is up. That's really an unrealised adjustment which doesn't impact our district fund. It's up because employees were able to carry over more leave because of the pandemic, so we expect that to reduce down again this year. And finally, rate support grant, why was it higher than estimated? We received additional allocations from Department for Communities last year, but they preceded an immediate cut to this year's rate support grant. So I think we received additional money last year on the basis that we knew that a cut was coming, and certainly this council have got a submission. The 7 impacted councils have a letter and with the 2 ministers seeking urgent engagement and getting this year's rate support grant restored to its normal level. So basically we got additional money last year knowing that we would have a significant cut this year, which we're trying to reverse, and we carried that money forward in reserves to cover the cut this year. So I hope that answers your questions, Brona. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Alfie.
Thank you, Alfie. Councillor Edwards.
Thanks for that, man. And this is a moot point. But in terms of the findings of the audit, I think they're common enough findings. But I just want to look again at finding 4 around leases. And Chair, over the last year, I have a difficulty working with some officers around leases and the old former Strabane council area. I just wanted to ask there, I don't know if John's on the call, is there an issue with documentation still in the Strabane area, especially around leases and other sort of financial obligations that the council has there? Because I did find it difficult. I got there in the end, but I found it difficult getting leases and documentation for a particular site and same. Also, just wanted to ask that question. Chair, thank you.
Chair, no, Councillor Edwards, I'm not aware of any particular geographical issue to do with leases. It's probably a case that across the organisation, from time to time, when a lease should be renewed, the service is continued and there's a lag with the renewal of the lease. That's the finding of the audit. I think that would perhaps agree with me. That's not particularly unusual, but it has been picked up by audit on this occasion, and we will be tightening our controls with regard to it. But no, I'm not aware of any particular geographical cluster of that, or that it was more prevalent in the former SDC area than the DCSDC area as a whole.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Well, folks, on that, no one else. We're looking for a recommendation to approve financial statements. The proposer and both seconded on the floor. Yeah, happy enough. Thank you, everyone. That concludes our meeting for today. Thank you.
Chair.
Thank you, Chair.